District Court of Denver, Colorado is now in session. The Honorable Jerry Munoz presiding. Be seated. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please stand. Raise your right hand. Okay. You and each of you do solemnly swear that by every living God that you will well and truly try the matter at issue between the state of Colorado and the defendant Mark Twain, and a true verdict render according to the evidence. Answer, I do.
I do.
Be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you are about to participate as jurors in a trial that involves the defendant, Mr. Mark Twain, and a true accused of trivializing white bigotry, perpetuating negative stereotypes of blacks, and misrepresenting slavery in his novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Let me remind you of the serious natures of your duties as a juror in this trial. It is important that you listen carefully and attentively throughout the course of the trial, taking notes if you wish, so that you might decide upon the credibility of each testimony and each witness, making judgments as to what the truth is, if there is conflicting testimony and evidence. The novel in question has long been regarded as a classic in American literature. It has been among the required books for high school students for generations. Recently, however, critics have indicted the book for racial sensitivity. Those concerns have resulted in the charges brought by the prosecution team today. If they are successful and you find Mr. Twain unanimously guilty on one or more of the 3 charges, the state will order that the novel be removed from the mandatory reading list in Denver public schools. We are now about to begin this case by listening to the opening statements of each team of lawyers. An opening statement is an outline of the case the lawyers will present. Listen carefully, as these introductory statements should be quite helpful in focusing your attention on the nature of the charges. Prosecution, are you ready to present your opening statement?
Yes, we are. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear evidence that in Mark Twain's novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain has made a joke out of something serious, slavery. Mark Twain has also trivialized white bigotry and perpetrated negative stereotypes of African American men. The story is about a black man, male slave, named Jim, running away with a little white boy. As the title states, adventures, they experience many. Mark Twain's representation of slavery in the novel becomes evident when he portrays Jim, a middle-aged black slave, as being happy and carefree, when in reality, excuse me, in that time period, there was no good side to slavery. Twain stereotypes black males as being uneducated, vulnerable, degraded. And as you hear this testimony today, keep in mind that our intentions are not to ban the book, but merely to keep the book off the required reading list.
Thank you, prosecution. Would the defense like to present their opening statement?
Yes, we're ready.
We are all assembled here in this courtroom for a very important reason. It is apparent that some people believe that the American classic, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, should be expurgated from required reading lists and taken out of high school curriculum on the basis that Mark Twain supposedly misrepresented slavery, trivialized white bigotry, and perpetuated negative stereotypes of African American men. Our job in defense of this novel is to prove to you, the members of the jury, that these aspects of the book have been misinterpreted by the prosecution. The point that the prosecution fails to recognize is that the message Mark Twain is trying to convey is not one of malice. Mark Twain's intent upon writing this book is not to criticize Afro-Americans. It is intended to show the inhumanity of bigoted whites. Jim, the main black character in the novel, is portrayed as the most admirable of all characters. Mark Twain did not trivialize white bigotry, he satirized it. Furthermore, the intent is definitely not to try to mislead the reader into believing untrue facts about slavery. The novel can be interpreted at 2 levels. as a pure adventure story and as a satire about the antebellum South. By using the element of satire in this book, Mark Twain shows how incredibly absurd these aspects of the antebellum South were. It is also obvious that Huck Finn contains vulgar and potentially dangerous material. The prosecution's way of dealing with this material is to ban it from schools and label it as racist trash. Although this solution might seem like the right thing to do, it is actually the worst decision one could make in this case. It is fair to say that everyone in this courtroom can agree that negative stereotypes about anybody or anything are bad. Why then should we take this novel and throw it out of our schools so that it can be read and misinterpreted by students who will have no supervision? Don't we agree that stereotypes and dislike for other peoples stem from ignorance? Do we want a group of irate parents to be able to tell us what we can and can't read? Now, through a series of witnesses, the defense will prove that Mark Twain is not guilty of these charges and that the novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn should not be banished from the academic society. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please take great care in making your decision today. The fate of an American classic rests with you. Thank you.
Thank you, defense. The prosecution team will now call its first witness.
I call Mr. Finn, Your Honor.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the... Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah.
Be seated.
Would you please identify yourself for the court?
Pap.
Is it true that you are a fictional character in Mark Twain's novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn?
Yeah.
What relation are you to Huckleberry?
I'm his dad. I should be able to hit him if I want to. Come here, boy.
Mr. Finn. What are your feelings about members of minority races, specifically blacks?
Put him back on the plantation.
Do you feel that Mr. Twain is a racist?
Seems to be a good, sensible man. Of course he's a racist.
Mr. Finn. Mr. Finn, please abide by the government.
Government? Government? Yeah, wonderful government. Sure, I'll tell you a story about your government, lady. Well, back I was in your big fancy town there going back, and I was walking towards the courthouse. There's this free nigger there, right? What is any white man you ever saw got this shiny little hat, and he's got his cane and walking around. And you know what they say? They say back in this town he's a professor, knowed everything, speaking all kinds of languages. Yeah, but that ain't the worst of it. That ain't the worst of it. So I'm heading in there to vote myself, right? And guess who comes walking in there to vote? They tell me this nigger, when he's back home, he can vote. That set me off. Think I'm gonna vote when I know there's a state here in this country where a nigger can vote? I don't think so. I just started heading out. I said, I'll never vote again. That's why I said, they all heard me too. They all heard me. So I said, now that nigger wouldn't have given me the road fine and shoved him out my way. I says, why ain't this nigger put up on auction and sold? And they says, well, he can't be sold until he's been here 6 months, and he's not been here that long. And I said, oh, hell of a government, huh? Here's the government. Thinks it's a government, calls itself a government, acts like a government, but here it's got to say, stock still for 6 months while a thieving, conniving nigger sits there and they can't do nothing for 6 whole months. Hell of a government.
Thank you, Mr. Finn. I have no more questions.
All right, Mr. Finn, stay up here. Would the defense like to cross-examine this witness?
Yes, Okay, Mr. Finn. Is it true that you beat your son?
Beat my son? Of course I beat him. Don't you beat your son?
Teachers and students, pardon the interruption.
Okay, I asked you if you beat your son.
I told you, yeah.
Okay. Is it true also that you're pretty much drunk all the time?
Am I right, ain't it?
Is it true that you've had barely
What you looking at, boy?
education?
Get back.
That will be enough, Mr. Finn.
Is it true that you barely had any education? Is it true that you're a racist bigot?
Racist bigot? Nah, I take offense to that. I don't think it's right for you to call me a racist bigot when I'm the only one in here that's got good sense enough to be a racist bigot. I think you should say, hey, that's swell. I don't think you should yell at me. If you was smarter, you'd be a racist too. You'd know they ain't got more brains than a dog.
Look, Mr. Twain, Mr. Finn, it looks like you're a bad influence on your son. Thus, I believe, the defense believes, that Mark Twain's purpose in Huck Finn was not to trivialize white bigotry, but to discredit the racist people.
Leading the witness.
Sustained.
The defense believes that all the bad aspects of Mr. Finn are not to show that racism is funny, or not to show that bigotry is funny,
Objection.
but to show that the racist people are themselves ignorant, stupid, uneducated,
Hey, come on.
drunk all the time. No further questions, Your Honor.
I'll sit down now.
Sit down, Mr. Finn. Would the prosecution like to call forth another witness?
Yes, we would, Your Honor. Would like to call Ms. Phelps.
Raise your right hand. Raise your right hand. Just raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Could you please state your name for the court?
Sally Mae Phelps.
Ms. Phelps, could you tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, I'm originally from Georgia, and I have 4 sisters and 1 brother.
Oh. Are you a character in Mr. Twain's book?
Yes, I am.
What's your relationship to Tom Sawyer?
Tom Sawyer. Well, his mother is my sister, so does that make me his aunt?
Could you point him out for us?
He's right over there. Isn't he cute?
Well, Ms. Phelps, you just pointed out Huck Finn.
Oh my goodness, I did. Oh, I can get those boys confused so easily.
Oh, okay. How do you feel about slavery?
Well, I just think it's the best thing this country has ever had. I mean, it just keeps those niggers in line.
So how do you feel about your nephew helping a runaway slave?
Well, I just think that was a bad thing, and he needs a whipping for that, but I just love him so much, I could never do that.
Oh, I see. Are you racist?
What's that?
Well, let me rephrase the question. Do you feel that people of color are beneath you?
Well, yes, I do, of course.
Oh. Ms. Phelps, could you please retell the court about the conversation with Huck regarding the boat accident?
Why, sure. Well, I thought my nephew Huck was coming to visit, and it was actually, I thought it was Tom, but it was really Huck, and he got off the boat, and I said, well, boy, what's taking you so long? And he said, well, they blew a cylinder head on the boat, and I said, well, was anybody hurt? And he said, a nigger got killed. And I said, well, that's a good thing, because sometimes people do get hurt.
Well, Ms. Phelps, a slave got killed.
Well, I know. Just think about that poor master. Probably lost about $200. What a shame. Maybe I'll bake him a pie.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, prosecution. Would the defense care to cross-examine the witness? Forward.
Okay, Miss Sally, would you consider yourself an educated lady?
Yes, I would.
Well, what kind of schooling have you had?
Well, my mama taught me in the home mostly.
So you really didn't go to school?
Well, not too much, but she taught me a lot of things that I need to know to survive.
Really?
Yeah. Excuse me, that's a really nice tie you have on there. I've been wanting to get my husband one. Could you tell me where you got that?
Irrelevant.
Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Well, Miss Sally, do you consider yourself knowledgeable?
Well, yes,
Do
I
you think you have the right kind of ideas? Do you think you have the whole side of the stories about life?
Well, I do. I really do.
You do.
Uh-huh. Do you think I don't?
Well, the defense doesn't. The defense thinks that Mark Twain used Aunt Sally just like Pap to discredit racist bigots. The defense believes that Mark Twain didn't use Aunt Sally or Pap to show how funny racism is,
Objection.
Overruled.
or to show that bigots are justified in their thinking that blacks are inferior to whites.
Excuse me,
But rather to
I'm
satirize-
really offended by this.
Satirize,
One person at a time.
which means
So-
to make light.
He's speaking to the jury.
Sustained.
But to show that bigots are themselves are unjustified, that they have no knowledge
Can I
themselves,
step down now?
No, you may not.
and
Excuse me, Mr. Bamberg, I sustained her objection.
okay.
Whatever that means.
Well, no further questions.
Okay, is the prosecution prepared to present its final witness?
Yes, the prosecution calls on Mr. President
Mr. Douglas, please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Please seated.
Please identify yourself for the court.
My name is Frederick Douglas.
Are you a character in Mr. Twain's novel?
No, I'm not. I'm an abolitionist, a freed slave, and I'm also the author of The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass. And above all, I'm a black man, not a mere boy.
Do you agree with Mr. Twain's novel?
No, I do not.
And why don't you agree with it?
He makes slavery a joyride. I've seen the horrors of slavery. I've seen companions whipped and killed just because they wouldn't obey the orders of their so-called master. I've seen mothers stripped of their newborn babies just so they could be sold at a slave auction. I've seen the horrors of slavery.
And so your main objection to this book is the portrayal of Jim.
Yes, it is.
Do you have any feelings regarding Pap or Aunt Sally and their racism and their bigotry?
Mr. Mark Twain portrays them as, makes them seem rich seeing everything. They're nothing but down, they're about as down as Jim himself. They lack knowledge, credibility, and as far as I see it, they're about as poor and trashy as Mark Twain and his little characters.
Mr. Douglas, you say you were a free slave?
Yes, that's correct.
How long were you in slavery?
Until I reached maturity of 27.
27 years in slavery?
27 years.
And could you tell the court about some of your most memorable?
Well, when I was in Baltimore, there was a little feud between the slave herder and one of my slave companions. He had just been severely beat. His back was gushing blood. And he ran into the river to smooth the ridge that had rose on his heavily beaten back. The slave master ordered him out to water. He didn't make any movement. The slave master said, "I'll call your name 3 times. If you don't come out, I was going to kill him." Called him once, no reaction. Called him twice, no reaction. The 3rd time, he didn't get a reaction. So he placed a mustard gun to his head, fired, killed him.
Mr. Douglas, I know this is hard for you, but were there any other instances that you can recall?
There is a lot to remember. They're the kind of memories that make grown men shiver. I mean, you have to sit there and watch a fellow slave whipped until his ridges rose upon the heavily beaten back. a nightmare.
What do you think is the tone of Mr. Twain's novel?
It was just racist trash.
The tone, Mr. Douglas.
Racist trash.
Mr. Douglas, Jim refers to the other slaves as nigger, and he also calls himself a nigger. Would you now agree that Mark Twain displays a racist point of view?
So nigger is a term that's been used by poor whites to give themselves a false sense of superiority among others. Mark Twain just continued this trashy tradition in his novel.
Oh, boy.
And a book like this tells me that the author sees only my color, not my content, not me, just another nigger.
Could you tell us precisely, if there was one statement you can tell Mark Twain, what would it be?
Get your damn facts straight.
No further questions.
Does the defense desire to cross-examine this witness?
Sure do. Mr. Douglas, I want to begin by saying that I admire your efforts for the abolition of slavery before and during the Civil War, and respect your writing and your first-hand descriptions of slavery and racism, and that anything or any questions posed to you during this trial are to prove to the jury that Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn is not itself racist and should be kept on high school reading lists, and are not intended to discredit your respectability or honor. With that in mind, I'll proceed. Mr. Douglas, is it true that this is your book right here, The Narrative Life of Predator Dogs?
Yes, it is.
Is it true that this book is told through your eyes? It's a truthful, actual representation of slavery?
Yes, it is.
Thus, it's realistic? Is that true?
Yes.
Well, wouldn't you say then that Huck Finn's Mark Twain is maybe not realistic? It has some romanticized features in it.
Yes, it does.
Well, in this book, this book is told not through the eyes of a person who directly experienced slavery, like you yourself, who went through the horrors and terrible beatings that all sympathize with you for, but through the eyes of a young 14-year-old, white, impressionable kid raised in the South before the Civil War, who was raised in bigoted times where people did use the word nigger a lot, which referred to as a slave, and changed through on the river with another man who learned to grow to love as a man, and saw the light, and saw that Jim maybe wasn't educated, but was sensitive, compassionate, and had moral character. Wouldn't you say that you yourself, would you call yourself when you weren't educated, is it true that you weren't educated when you were beginning your life as a slave?
Yes, at one time it was.
You was not.
Yes.
Right. Would you then call yourself a dumb person? Just because you didn't know the vocabulary, or didn't know how to spell or read or write?
As of now.
No.
Or
Would you call yourself stupid? Do you think you're not good enough?
I've always had the urge, the guts to learn.
That's right.
I did feel that I was missing something, but I knew one day I was going to get it.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of history, blacks were not allowed to be educated in schools. So Jim right here does not have any education. But, on the other hand, just as you said, he does not have any education, but he has common sense, and he has human kindness.
Mark Twain should
And
never
through
wrote the
important incidents in this book, Huck Finn realizes that about Jim. He's taught lessons through Jim, because Jim was not educated, but he had common sense, and he had gone through a lot more than Huck Finn had. It's Huck Finn being a young boy. Mr. Douglas, let me ask you one more question. Isn't it true that it seems that you object to the portrayal of Jim and slaves
May I ask you a question?
as in their seem ignorance.
Was
but
that a question or a statement?
I'm
Here to the
beginning my
questions,
question with a little preface. You object to these superstitions sometimes in the book here about Jim and some of the dumb things you think are show how dumb Jim is. But isn't it true that you used elements of superstition by slaves in your own non-fictional narrative? Like the time when a slave on the, see if I forget the name, the Coles plantation, that a slave gave to you a little root, told you that if you carried that around every day, that you would never get beaten by your master. Isn't that true?
Well, I was beaten later. Like,
Well, no, in your narrative, I'm sorry, you better look in this book. You should know it. You wrote it. In this book, you walked around with that. He said that he never got beat. That seems a little superstitious to me. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Step down. Okay, defense. Let me inform you, you have 10 minutes to do this, so let's try to speed it up a little bit. Are you ready to present your first witness?
The defense calls for the stand, Jim.
That's a nigger, kill my boy. That's him.
Sit down, Mr. Finn. Now, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Jim, can you please tell the jury who you are?
I be Jim, a fictional character in Mark Twain's novel, Huckleberry Finn.
What is your relation to Huck Finn?
I be his friend.
Jim, do you think that you are a caring person?
I do.
Do you remember the time that you found out that your daughter was deaf?
I do.
Could you please explain the incident? And could you please explain the incident and how it made you feel?
Well, what happened was that I asked my daughter to close the door, and she didn't hear me. So I went over and scolded her, and so I told her close it. And then when the wind slammed it really loud and she didn't jump, I knew she was deaf.
And how did that make you feel?
I felt very sad. I wish I could help her somehow.
Jim, do you recall the day after the night in the fog when you were separated from Huck Finn?
I do.
What did Huck do to you that morning?
He told me that it was all a dream.
So this was obviously a sick joke on Huck's part.
It was.
How did that joke make you feel?
I felt bad, and I told him that people are trash who play tricks on their friends, and that he should be ashamed of himself.
So you were teaching Huck a lesson that friends don't do things like that to each other.
I was.
Okay. Do you remember when you discovered Huck's pap floating down the river dead?
I do.
Why did you purposely shield Huck's eyes from his dead father?
I felt you should have known at that time that his father was dead.
Do you remember the time you predicted an oncoming storm and provided shelter for yourself and Huck?
Yes.
How did you know that storm was coming?
I saw the birds flying overhead, flying away because the storm was coming.
Jim, some people say you are stupid. How does this make you feel?
Well, it was considered a crime to be educated, a black man, a black slave to be educated. So I didn't want anyone to know because it was against the law to be educated.
Jim, do you remember the squabble with Huck about foreign languages?
I do.
Do you think that the reason you have this uncertainty about foreign languages is because since you're a slave, you're not allowed any schooling?
Yeah.
Do you think that this is a reflection of how smart you are?
No.
Do you think that a lack of school smarts means a lack of all common sense?
No.
Thank you. No further question.
No, sir.
Okay, would the prosecution care to cross-examine this witness?
Jim,
Yes,
could you state your full name?
I am Jim.
Just Jim?
I am Jim.
You don't know your last name, Jim?
I am Jim.
Okay, Jim. You and Tom here, you guys were friends.
Yes, we were.
And isn't it true that you constantly took abuse from your so-called friend?
Well, he was white and I was black.
And what does this have to do with it, Jim?
Well, as it pointed out in Frederick Douglass's novel, as he said before, whites beat on blacks and took abuse from blacks. I mean whites.
But Jim, wasn't it true that you were running away from slavery on the river?
Yes, it was.
And so doesn't that make you a free slave?
Yes, it does.
And why, when you were still on the river, why did you constantly take abuse from Huck?
I don't know.
Jim, isn't it true that that Tom here and the king and the duke painted your face blue, dressed you up as a Arab, and left you there for days on the raft by yourself, no means of survival? And you still stuck with Huck?
It was to protect me from the slave catchers.
But wouldn't you have rather ran and found some kind of food or shelter rather than sit on a raft day by day with no food, no means of protection over your head? What if it started raining? Well, don't you think that you would rather run free?
And some people, I guess so, yeah.
But in your opinion, what?
Yeah.
Why did you, why do you think that your friend, Huck over here, put snakes and rats and spiders in your quarters while you were in prison? Why do you think that he just didn't let you go? Why didn't he just let, they had all these plans for you. Why didn't they just tell, climb you out the window or something? If he was your friend, don't you think that he would have took the easy route?
Yes. But
No further questions.
Jerry may step down.
thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, looks like we're short of time. We're going to have to hold this trial over. Or maybe not. Defense, you may call forth your next witness.
Defense calls Huck Finn.
Huck, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
All right, Huck, could you please tell the jury who you are and
I'm Huckleberry Finn. I'm a character in Mark Twain's novel.
Okay, let me begin. Tell me about your thoughts about Jim before the river, before you got on the river with him, helping him escape.
He was just another slave, someone that we could mess around with, have a little fun.
Right. And then what started to happen as you got on the river with him?
He
Did
showed
he
that
teach you anything?
Yeah, he showed that he cared for me. He's a better father than that piece of shit.
Shut your mouth!
Settle down. There'll be no more talk like that.
Well,
Proceed.
okay.
So what would you say?
He's lying! I told him everything he knows! I told him everything! I know him
Mr. Finn, sit down or I'll find you in contempt of this court. See, Duck?
Could you tell me a little bit about the times that you lived in? What was the city like? What were the people like? What were their views on racism?
They're all racist. They're all trash. They didn't know how to treat one another.
Except for him.
Is that right?
Nigger lover boy!
Quiet, Mr. Finn.
So are you saying that you pretty much had at first you didn't really, you thought you kind of went along with society?
Yes.
And that later on the raft, you learned some things and you had an open mind?
Yes.
Well, could you tell me a little bit about Pat?
I dare you.
Racist pig. He's
What kind of father was he?
He was the worst father in the world. He couldn't teach me anything.
All right, you get in the skinny now. I'll be going, boy, if you want to.
You'll sit down too, Mr. Finn.
I'll get you afterwards, boy. Can you hide?
Is it right to say that this man over here really didn't have much influence on you? He had an influence, but a bad influence, in that when you got together with Jim, you learned a lot more things.
Yes.
So is it right to say that he had no right in discrediting black people?
Yes.
Well, what right does he have?
None.
He's not even educated himself. What did he teach you?
Nothing.
Right. Could you tell me a little bit about that note that you thought you wrote to back to Miss Watson and your home? What did you do, and then what did you do after you thought about it?
I wrote a letter to Ms. Watson to tell her where Jim was to send him back in.
To turn him in.
And
then when you thought
when
about
I
it,
thought about it, I could find no reason why I could or how I could, because he was my father, practically, better than him. So he's taught me about everything I know. Not everything, but a lot. And so he's one of the best men I've ever known.
So why did you call Jim a nigger? Is that degrading to you? When you call him a nigger, does that mean you think of him as lower than you?
No.
It looks like nigger means slave.
To me, it just means a black man.
But that doesn't mean you hold Jim in any lower character.
No.
He sure is a little better than your father.
Yes, definitely.
I'll tell you too.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Does the prosecution care to cross-examine?
Let me cross-examine it.
Yes, we would, Your Honor. You just referred to Jim as a father figure,
Yes, I did.
and so you're saying that you care about him.
Yes, I did.
Do you also care about Tom Sawyer?
He's a really good friend of mine.
A really good friend. Would you leave Tom Sawyer chained up on a raft for a couple of days just forgetting about him?
No, I wouldn't.
Did you and so leave Jim on a raft?
Yes, I did.
Would do you happen to put rats and spiders and snakes into Tom's room if he asked you not to? Did you, in fact, after Jim said that he didn't like snakes and spiders and rats, then you so in fact put them in his quarters?
Yes, I did.
That's the only good move he ever made in his life.
Quiet, Mr. Finn.
And didn't you, in fact, go through many more changes than you would have had to free Jim on behalf of an adventure?
What?
Mr. Finn, didn't you, in fact, instead of breaking him out of the window, didn't you leave Jim in the shack that he was in for 2 weeks while you dug him out? Well, wouldn't it have been much easier to break him out of the window?
Yes.
Would you leave Tom Sawyer in a shack for 2 weeks when you know there's an easier way to go?
No, I wouldn't.
No further questions, Jim.
Okay, step down. Defense, would you like to present your final witness?
The defense would like to call Mr. Twain to the stand.
Mr. Twain, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, seems the only one that I know it here.
Please be seated.
Mr. Twain, please introduce yourself to the jury.
I'm Mark Twain. I'm the author of this book, Adventures with Huckleberry Finn. Some people are ignorant enough to believe it should be removed from the shelves. I don't understand.
Thank you, that's quite enough. One of the charges brought against you here today is that you trivialized white bigotry. In other words, that you didn't take racism seriously. What was your true intent here in creating the comic racist characters?
I did not trivialize white bigotry, but I satirized it. The definition of satire I used is a literary technique in which I use to ridicule behaviors of people in the South. And it forms a correction.
Was this your intent? Hold on. So are you admitting to satirizing African Americans?
Yes, but not to humor them. I satirized also poor white trash over there at Pat and Aunt Sally.
Who you calling poor white trash?
Let's have some silence over there, please.
It shows that they are below racism. They have no meaning in life. I satirize them, show how idiotic they are, and how idiotic racism is. And I show how that through Jim and how he's wise. He has more content than Frederick.
Was this your intended interpretation in writing the novel?
I'll just find my notes real quick. Well, you have two different interpretations. You have an interpretation of a kid going on an adventure, getting away from society, two people escaping society, to get away from racism. And on a more mature level, you can see that there is a satire, and it depicts how humans can be cruel to one another.
Was this your intended, hold on, no, I mean tell the jury about the narrative style of the book.
Well, there's a difference in point of view in Mr. Douglas's book and mine. He's telling it through his eyes. I'm telling it through the eyes of a white trash kid. He's young, raised in the South, and he simply uses the term nigger as synonymous with slave. That's how Pat taught him. Jim would teach him otherwise.
Would you label your book realistic or romantic?
It's a realistic novel, but since seeing that it's fiction, it contains some elements of romanticism.
So you do admit to using the word nigger in your book?
Yeah, why?
Why? I mean, why do you use the word?
I use it as a vernacular to show the realism of the book of that time. I've studied the language and the slang of the South used among the slaves, and I personally know it very well, and that's the reason I use it, to show the realism of this book.
Thank you, that's all.
Yeah. This trial will have to be held over until tomorrow.